Hopefully, you found the last clip on Makila's interesting and giving you a sense of what export-led industrialization looks like in Mexico. And just to sort of summarize this portion, right, of the sort of mature modernization that happened in the 1970s and could sort of generally sort of continues today, we can sort of think about, sort of the different positions, right? Market-oriented perspectives emphasize that export processing zones help in the sort of further growth of third world countries, right? Allows them for development, allows them for economic growth. On the other hand, right, the maldevelopment perspective emphasized that export-led industrialization really just benefits the multinational corporations and the first world. It allows them to profit more. And in general, we have the sort of absence of any real economic development of the country, even in the communities where these EPZ zones, EPZs are flourishing. The sort of benefits locally are actually limited, and it only generates a few number of jobs. So now let's turn to the neoliberalism phase, which is the current phase and which extends, provides an extension of what is going on in terms of the export-led industrialization. So, as I mentioned previously, in 1980, there was sort of a general consensus of the failure of the sort of Marsation approach to development, right? While Rostow and people like him argued in the 1950s and was sort of implemented, right, in the 60s and 70s. And by the 1980s, World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, sort of declared to everyone that there needed to be sort of a change in sort of economic policies around the world, and how industrialization was sort of taken up and development was promoted in the third world. What they declared instead was, the emergence of neoliberalism as the new framework, the new approach, the new sort of policy paradigm, policy regime that was going to be adopted across the board. And this was, as I mentioned, right, a policy that was, came out of the sort of rising debt in the third world and the sort of breaking down of many of the initial attempts to for development, and countries around the world, countries in the third world, countries in the first world, were looking for an alternative. And the those that sort of believe in the market-oriented approach, they sort of made adjustments to their sort of theories and frameworks and models, and really sort of promoted neoliberalism as the new answer. For the purpose of our discussion today, neoliberalism plays out in terms of the rise of the system of contract production. Mean to say, while previously, right, we begin to see the sort of expansion of export-led industrialization more and more, right, as countries in the third world adopted export production. They were given pre-assigned sort of tasks or pre-assigned products to be made, right? This component to be made in this country, this component to be made in that country, in this factory, that factory, and this factory over here will bring all of the components together, and so on. So really, on a global scale, you begin to see not the production of the full product in the third world, but really, sort of component manufacturing, right? Contract manufacturing, right? Having contractors either within the country or contractors outside in a different country, to make smaller products, and really, the sort of next in line in the production are really sort of just assembling, right, putting together the previous components, and then really at the end sort of just packaging what's there. So at the end you can have, here is a a blue jean, or here is a computer, or here's a smartphone. So whatever is being produced more and more occurs under this sort of neoliberalism sort of framework. And part of it is this the companies sort of downsize in scale, right? They're not hiring all the workers themselves. Instead, somebody else hires the workers, gives them benefits, and so the actual, right, garment factory or the actual apparel company, right, isn't fully responsible, right, for the benefits, the work conditions for the workers working as part of the subcontractors. And so increasingly, this is happening since the 1980s as companies sort of downsize and in many ways adopted the sort of framework of neoliberalism. In addition, we begin to see more and more the IMF and World Bank and even major countries in the first world like the US pushing for neoliberalism, right? Trying to get countries to adopt aspects of neoliberalism, right? Trade liberalization, privatization, deregulation, denationalization, all of these things as part of the sort of new arrangements, new loans being sort of negotiated starting in the 1980s to the present. And many of these new loans weren't to create, right, new product or new programs per se, but usually these loans occur because the countries are in economic hardship. So again, think back to the video on Senegal here and groundnuts, right? When the country is facing hardship from the earlier loans that they had, right? They now have to pay for the earlier loans, but they only have the money to even pay for the earlier loans. They're just even paying for the interest on their earlier loans. And again, think about your own experience of credit card bills. If what happens when you just pay the interest and you never really pay off the principal? Of course, that means your loan keeps getting bigger and bigger, and really at the end, right? Either the bank agrees to basically cancel your loan, or right, in this case, right, to give you a new loan, to new arrangement. So yes, we'll give you another loan, a better loan, but you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, and so those conditionalities were added to these newer loans, and oftentimes secret, right? Oftentimes hidden to the people that the country was being impacted, right? So whether you're, let's say, Algeria, and your government is negotiating these loans, but the people in Algeria do not know about these conditionalities, right? That they're going to be privatization happening, or there's deregulation happening, and only until the loans are sort of signed and deal and done, and things are actually being implemented, that the people in the country realize that this is what the government has sort of negotiated and what's happening. So oftentimes, highly secret arrangements happen. And again, we'll talk more about the question of trade and some of these loan issues next time. But here, just to highlight how this impacts really the sort of industrialization that's happening. So while the factories are now, right, increasingly still doing export-oriented production, but to keep, right, the economy afloat, the governments have to sort of take up these loans, and in the process have to change their economic structure or arrangements in their countries. And so what are some things that we're talking about here? One is denationalization. Meaning to say, right, in the earlier discussion, we talked about, right, countries, building airports, building, electric plants, even building, oil processing plants. Well, what happens when, right, you're broke, your bank wants you to pay up? Well, one way is to sell off your assets, right? To sell off your airports, right? And have somebody else run the airport, somebody else manage the airport. Um, uh, so increasingly, hospitals, railway, even schools, right, are being privatized. They're in some ways still government operated, right, government owned, but really more and more, right, sold literally, right, in terms of the assets to corporations all over the world. And so, while in the beginning, right, the governments in the third world pushed to create the infrastructure for their own country to benefit people in their own country, now more and more these assets are now being sold and transferred or contracted out to corporations. Second is the sort of deregulation, meaning to say, right, previously corporations were, had to, enforce, strong labor laws, has to follow environmental laws, had to ensure that they follow laws that protect the interests of third world governments. But as what neoliberalism provides is the reverse, right? It weakens uh, uh, protections for workers, the protection for the environment, weakens for the protection for third world countries in terms of trade, and all to benefit, right, the corporations, first world corporations, multinational corporations, and to benefit first world country. So to get the loans, you basically have to do these things, which then, if you think about what happens in the factories, right? So at the end, this allows the factories to, not to follow certain restrictions on, to follow certain conditions on work, work benefits, work arrangements, and so on. And lastly, right, sort of connected to the question of denationalization is the sort of the rise of privatization of state assets. And here, when I sort of mentioned earlier, sort of the selling of government assets. Here, we're really sort of talking about, giving those assets, sort of long-term rights to corporations. Corporations being able to operate and run airports, hospitals, even prisons. Right here in the U.S., this is what's happening. Right, prisons, even the military is increasingly allowing the U.S. military allowing for, right, some of the what it does to be operated by private militaries. But really, when you look at this in the third world, right, the things that were operated by the government, let's say factories, are now, right, being sold to corporations so that they run and operate. And if they're factories, they're literally being sold. But of course, if they're like hospitals, they are sometimes still labeled as government hospitals, but really those hospitals are operated by corporations, and whatever profit the hospital makes, it goes to the corporation. It doesn't go to the people, in that country or so on, but it goes to the multinational corporation. So you could see what happens, right, in terms of this phase of neoliberalism. It is still generally export-led industrialization, right? There is still the sort of stunting of, countries in the third world to be able to make, things that can compete on the global market, right? At least compete with the U.S. Only certain things are being allowed to be made, right? Yes, you can make computers. Yes, you can make, let's say, personal computers, but you're not allowed to make, right, supercomputers, right? So there's really restrictions on what third world countries are able to sort of being made. If they're just consumer goods, no problem, right? You can have the market for that. The third world countries can have the market to make those things, right? The companies don't make a lot of money, go for it, right? But things that are very important for the first world, whereas high rates of profit, then those are the ones that they sort of keep and don't allow, right, third world countries to make, and they don't really they restrict corporations to allow their uh, companies, their subsidiaries, to make these products in the third world. So I want you to see another clip. Here is an example of privatization in Egypt, and just to sort of give you a feel of the issues that the workers are talking about and why the government wants to privatize, what they're thinking about, and what they want to do with the sort of factory, all of those things. And of course, linked to all this was loans that were given by the IMF World Bank. So as you watch the video, think about do you think governments like Egypt, there were governments should privatize their assets? They've already done it, but should they keep doing it? Should they sort of reverse the privatization? Should they get loans, or again, the loans are usually conditional to privatization and governments adopt greater neoliberalism, right? So should they get more loans from the IMF and World Bank? Why or why not?